Hi everyone! Since Eald'narche's LD weapon and rework recently got released in the global version of DFFOO, I decided to take a short break from battle videos and do a quick video on how to use Eald'narche. Eald'narche is actually a solid character and his terror debuff when used in the right situations can really shut down Lufenia boss mechanics very hard, and in some stages can actually cheese the entire fight. Before I head into the battle, some quick disclaimers that this video is really for informative purposes only. The way that I will describe using Eald'narche will follow my own personal playstyle, and of course there are always going to be differences in how people play and use certain characters. I'm always a firm believer that there are a few different ways and approaches to use different characters and defeat Lufenia stages. So by no means this is the one and only way to use Eald'narche. However, this is the way that I prefer to use Eald'narche. Of course, for Lufenia fights, you always have to adjust for differences. So for example, differences in the boss mechanics and the boss attacks, and of course differences in your party composition and who you choose to bring alongside Eald'narche to the fight, because then you may want to use Eald'narche a little bit differently. And of course, for all Lufenia fights, I highly recommend to always study the boss mechanics before heading into the fight, so that you can adjust your party composition and playstyle accordingly. In this video, I'll be doing a very brief and quick overview on Eald'narche's kit. I will be then covering a little bit about party composition and who I believe would make great team members for Eald'narche. And lastly, I'll be covering a little bit about how to maximize the use of his terror debuff. Okay, so coming to Eald'narche's kit, and first of all, really credits goes to the Tonberry Troupe for their awesome infographic. And as you can see here, do check out all their character infographics on Tonberry Troupe's website, and you can find them on Reddit as well, because it's a very nicely done overview of every character's kit. So I'll just be covering Eald'narche's kit and skills very briefly before I head on to the party composition. So first of all, the main reason why you will ever want to bring Eald'narche in your Lufenia fights is really for his terror debuff. He of course does solid damage in the current meta in the global version of the game, and he actually does have some pretty decent debuffs, but those are not very unique or noteworthy, and there are many other characters who bring probably higher damage and can also do debuffs as well. But Eald'narche is, I guess, somewhat special because he is the only character in the game that can inflict terror. Terror itself is a very potent debuff. As long as the enemy or boss is targeting Eald'narche or targeting the entire party, when they are inflicted by terror, they will be disabled for the turn. So in essence, terror works as a paralyze so long as the enemy is targeting Eald'narche or the party. Now coming to Eald'narche's kit, he actually has what you can consider as two forms. So he starts off the fight always having phase shift as his skill 1 and having Uranus Cascade as his skill 2. And he starts off the battle surrounded by his exoplates, which is those squarish plates you see floating around him. And he will actually change his form and change his S1 and S2 skills after you use phase shift, or if he loses all his HP, he will automatically go into phase shift and change his skills accordingly. When you use phase shift with Eald'narche, his S1 will change to Stellar Burst, and his S2 will change to Omega Javelin. And both his S1 and S2 will replenish to their maximum skill uses, which is 5 skills for Stellar Burst and 7 skills for Omega Javelin. This also means that before he uses phase shift, you can actually use his Uranus Cascade, his original skill 2, and it will replenish to full 7 skill uses of Omega Javelin. So in essence, his Uranus Cascade prior to phase shift are free skill users, all 7 skills of them. In terms of his debuff, his Uranus Cascade inflicts attack down, and it is the only skill in his arsenal that will inflict attack down, which means that after he phase shifts, he no longer will be able to inflict attack down ever again in the rest of the fight. And once you use phase shift with Eald'narche, you cannot phase shift back to his Exoplates form. Phase shift itself is an instant turn rate, so it means that Eald'narche will get an immediate turn after, and importantly, phase shift inflicts 2 turns of terror debuff. His only other way to inflict terror will come from the plus version of his EX, which is Vortex, and he can only use his plus version of his EX after he uses phase shift. So what this means is that to inflict terror with Eald'narche, which is really the main reason why you bring him in your party anyway, the only way to do that is to use phase shift and subsequently to use EX after he has phase shifted. You may be considering then that it might be beneficial to immediately just phase shift at the start of the fight so that you can inflict terror. However, there are some considerations here, and I'll go more into that during the battle demo that I'll be doing. But essentially, you may want to hold off on using phase shift because when he is in his Exoplates form, he does have some benefits. So he actually halves Brave and HP damage taken in Exoplates, and he has an innate debuff immunity in Exoplates form. And as I mentioned, if he actually dies, which is if his HP goes down to 0 in Exoplates form, he will be revived to full health, but he will automatically go into phase shift mode. His LD weapon is newly released, and it actually adds a lot to his kit. Beyond the usual boost to attack, bringing him up to par in the current meta in the global version of the game, his LD also inflicts 2 very important debuffs. The first is the warp debuff, which is the same warp as his Omega Javelin, and again I will cover warp in more detail during the battle demo. But the other important debuff is a frame debuff called Sustenance for Paradise, which actually carries a nice 30% defense down as well. The other important thing about Eald'narche's kit is his C65 or additional ability. When you use his additional ability and he starts the fight with 2 users of his additional ability, and you should definitely Bloomstone Eald'narche if you ever plan to use him because his AA is a very important part of his kit. Essentially, when you use his additional ability, it allows him to inflict debuffs with an additional 2 turn duration for the next 4 turns. So essentially what this means is that if you use his additional ability and he uses either his phase shift or EX plus, he will be inflicting 4 turns of terror as opposed to 2 turns. Because his terror can only be inflicted by his EX. I do not count his phase shift because his phase shift is a 1 turn use only. So because his terror can only be inflicted by his EX, what this means is that you do need to cycle through and charge his EX in between, or I should say charge his EX before terror wears off on the boss, so that you can re-inflict terror again and keep the boss locked down. The tricky part though is Eald'narche's EX comes with a slow recast bar, and under normal circumstances you will require 3 skill users to charge his EX. And if terror only lasts for 2 turns, you can imagine it's going to be hard to keep the boss terror locked. And that is why it is very important to use his additional ability to extend the use of terror to 4 turns as opposed to 2 turns. Importantly, his LD will give you a free ability use the next turn after you use his LD, and I normally would highly advocate to use his free ability use on his additional ability, so that you can actually use his additional ability more than 2 times during the course of the fight. So as you can imagine, I've talked a lot about his terror debuff, and again, I cannot emphasize this enough. If you plan to pull and plan to use Eald'narche, the main reason should be to fully capitalize on his terror debuff. And if you feel that it's not interesting and it's not the way that you want to approach Lufenia fights, then I actually don't recommend pulling or using Eald'narche, because beyond the terror debuff, the other parts of his kit can be done by many other characters in the game, and you might as well just save your resources for the other characters. Before I head into the party composition, just one final note I want to say is that he also has his high armor released with the current event in the global version of the game, and I actually do recommend getting his high armor if you plan on using Eald'narche a lot. His high armor is a debuffer armor, and in total, assuming he inflicts his standard debuffs, that combined with his high armor gives a total of a 120% defense down to the boss, which in Lufenia fights is very significant to sustain his and your entire party's DPS. So that's it. Let's go into the party composition. Okay, so coming to party setup with Eald'narche, because the main reason why you would normally want to bring Eald'narche is to lock down the bosses with terror. This means that in the fights that you want to cheese with Eald'narche, you don't normally need to bring in a tank character or potent healers in your party, because the boss is expected to be disabled or locked down for most of the fight. So that actually clears up some room in your team. The other thing that you should consider is that Eald'narche himself carries a range of debuffs, and in the current state of the game, you can only inflict a maximum of 6 debuffs. So you do need to watch out for conflicting debuffs, because for the most part, you want to make sure that Eald'narche has room to inflict and re-inflict terror when it expires. So do be careful, especially considering characters with multiple frame debuffs, such as Emperor, who was recently released. There are certain roles that would pair up and complement Eald'narche very nicely, and the first of which would be aura support characters who provides strong attack auras for the party. And that's for 2 reasons. So firstly, Eald'narche's damage isn't very high on his own, and having aura characters helps to boost the damage that he brings out. Secondly, Eald'narche carries very potent defense down debuffs, So if you pair that up with a character that can provide good or solid attack auras, you will enable your entire party to hit for very nice damage even in the latest Lufenia fights. So what you see on the screen here are just some examples of good aura characters. Here I include Ramza, Baltier, and Paladin Cecile, but they are of course not exhaustive. There are many other support characters that can also fulfill this role. I picked these three to showcase, mainly because they don't carry many debuffs on their own. So Baltier doesn't have any debuffs, Ramza only has one, and so does Paladin Cecile. Paladin Cecile, I think, is especially noteworthy in terms of a support character because he also provides Holy Enchant and Holy Imperil, which will allow Eald'narche and the rest of your party to hit for Holy Weakness damage. And on top of that, Paladin Cecile also carries Brave and HP damage boosts, which again helps to boost the damage of your party. Now, other than the support characters, you do have to consider battery-based characters. So here again, it's not exhaustive, but I've put in Kral, Ares, and Realm as examples. Kral and Ares carries very strong batteries in their kit, which will help out Eald'narche a lot because when you use Eald'narche, you will actually want to spend many of his turns using his HP++ attack because he actually gets many free turns and you cannot be spamming his skills, otherwise he will run out of steam very quickly. Having a battery in the party allows Eald'narche to still hit for very respectable damage with his HP++ attack, and will therefore enable you to meet the often tight turn requirements in Lufenia stages. There are many other battery characters, of course, so again, really this is not exhaustive. I want to give Realm very special mention here. She might seem an odd mention for a battery character, but I actually really enjoy pairing Realm with Eald'narche because beyond the battery that Realm provides and the roughly average attack auras as well, Realm also has somewhat of a turn manipulation in her kit, in the sense that with the sketch debuff on the enemy, Realm always gets a free turn after the enemies have acted. And this is actually the exact same mechanic as how Warp would act for Eald'narche. And in essence, what this means is that if you pair Realm with Eald'narche and the enemy is debuffed with Sketch and Warp, you actually get 2 free actions, or I should say 1 free action each with Realm and Eald'narche after every enemy turn, even if the enemy is disabled by Terror, which I find a lot of fun and provides you a lot of opportunities to squeeze extra damage in the fight. The third category of characters, of course, that will complement Eald'narche very well would be damage dealers. And again, here I put in Squall, Lightning, and Ultimacia as examples. But really, this game has many characters who fulfill the role of DPS. And there are many other characters who will probably also do well with Eald'narche. I picked these 3 to showcase here in the video because they carry additional benefits beyond DPS that would benefit Eald'narche. Well, I guess that only goes for Lightning and Ultimacia. Squall is really just a raw DPS, but he is currently the top DPS in the global version of the game, so you know I should at least put him in here for mention. Lightning and Ultimacia, I really want to give special mention because they carry some form of turn delay or turn deletion in their kit as well, which helps a lot if you need to buy additional turns for Eald'narche to charge his EX meter and re-inflict terror. So for example, Lightning actually can delay the bosses quite a lot, and that will allow Eald'narche to get additional turns in between the boss's turns, which will then allow you to charge his EX and re-inflict terror when you need to. Likewise with Ultimercia, she has a lot of free turns, which will help you out as well from that perspective. But of course, her BT weapon also deletes the enemy's turns, which will give you a lot of breathing room for Eald'narche as well. And very nicely, these characters don't carry a lot of debuffs with them. So Lightning and Ultimercia carry only one debuff each, and Squall himself doesn't have any debuffs. So they work really well with Eald'narche as DPS characters. So that's it for party composition. Maybe just one final note to mention. Of course, when putting together a party with Eald'narche as the core, again, you really want to look at the boss mechanics and look at what the boss can do, because there are different characters with additional benefits that you may want to consider bringing in for the fight. So for example, what is the Lufenia Orb trigger in the stage, and do you need to bring another character to account for the Lufenia Orb? Or do you need other utilities beyond what is mentioned here? So for example, specific elemental enchant or imperil, or if you need something like debuff immunity or debuff prevention, or other forms of debuff or turn manipulation. So always look at what the boss can do when you are putting together your party for the Lufenia fight. Okay, I forgot to mention two very important characters that go really well with Eald'narche, and these are Onion Knight and Cloud. Onion Knight is also a fantastic character to consider as a partner for Eald'narche. In a way, he's similar to Paladin Cecile in that he can enchant and imperil an element, in this case Ice Element. And he also does have some nice auras, not as good as Paladin Cecile, but still somewhat solid. Especially if you have Onion Knight's burst weapon. Onion Knight's burst effect will really shore up the attack potencies of your party. But beyond all of that, Onion Knight does have a very special benefit that Eald'narche can fully utilize. And this comes from Onion Knight's LD weapon. So first of all, Onion Knight's LD can turn manipulate and can bring forward Eald'narche's turn. And for a character like Eald'narche, this can actually be quite crucial. For example, if you need one additional Eald'narche action to charge his EX meter or to unleash his EX just in time, you can use Onion Knight LD to allow you that one crucial turn. In addition to that, Onion Knight's LD also provides your entire party with one free skill use, and in Eald'narche's case, that means that Eald'narche can benefit from one additional free AA skill use per LD cast of Onion Knight, which is quite huge. Cloud, I think, also deserves special mention because Cloud can delay with his LD weapon, and that again helps Eald'narche to get additional time to charge his EX meter and unleash terror. But if you can't, for some reason, inflict terror on time, Cloud is something like a safety net because he can actually inflict paralysis with his cross/plus. So if you can't get terror off in time, you can at least just paralyze the boss with Cloud. So it's like an extra safety net. Okay, so I'll be doing a quick demo video with Eald'narche, and over here I'll be commenting as I go along, mainly just focusing on Eald'narche's kit, and be covering a little bit on the rationale on why I choose to use different skills that he has at different points, and how I choose when to use his EX, because these are really important decisions to make throughout the course of the battle, to maximize uptime of his terror debuff. I'll be doing it on his lost chapters because it's a fantastic stage to fully utilize the power of his terror and warp debuff. And for this stage, I actually use Realm and Ares as partners. Realm I've mentioned because she pairs very well with Eald'narche. And Ares, beyond the battery and auras that she provides, is especially useful for this stage because she carries a debuff immunity for the party, which helps to prevent the debuffs that the boss and the beast can actually inflict on your party. So that's it, let's head on to the battle. I'll see you there. Okay, so as mentioned at the start of the video, Eald'narche always starts the fight in his first form, where he's surrounded by his exoplates. And in this form, he has Phase Shift and Uranus Cascades as his skill 1 and skill 2. While he's in his first form, he is not able to inflict terror and warp debuff, which severely limits his utility. And you may be very tempted to just immediately Phase Shift and inflict terror and warp with his Omega Javelin. However, you might want to consider holding off on Phase Shift, and the main reason for that is at the start of the fight, if you just spam his Uranus Cascade, it actually helps a lot on his longevity because you can charge his EX meter with technically what is a free skill use in his Uranus Cascade. And then once his EX meter is charged, you can then Phase Shift and replenish all his skill users to maximum again. In most Lufenia fights at the start of the fight, it's also pretty harmless because the bosses usually spend their first few turns doing harmless brave attacks. And using Uranus Cascade also inflicts an attack down, which significantly reduces the threat from the bosses at the start of the fight. So here I'm just using Uranus Cascade again, and for this fight, because the boss is really only very threatening when he gets a full EX meter, I decided to just hold off on Phase Shift until the boss has a full EX meter. And how long you want to hold off on using Phase Shift really depends on the actual fight itself. You have to look at the boss's attacks and mechanics and see, which big attack do you really want to prevent with Eald'narche, and hold off on his Phase Shift until the attack is about to land. In many of the fights, you can actually tell when the big attacks are coming, so it's not difficult to plan in advance for that. Okay, so here the boss has gotten a full recast bar, and I really want to inflict terror before his next turn. So here, if you look at the turn bar, the boss has also self-delayed itself, and it won't get a turn for quite some time yet. So I'm still holding off on using Phase Shift, and I'm still using Uranus Cascade here. Okay, so if you look at the turn bar now, boss B is about to get a turn, and very nicely Eald'narche's EX is about to charge. So here I'll be using his Phase Shift to inflict terror on the boss and go into his second form. Personally, I actually don't normally use his additional ability when using Phase Shift. You can inflict immediately 4 turns of terror if you use his additional ability before Phase Shift. But because Eald'narche now, as you can see, has a full EX meter, there's really no point on inflicting 4 turns of terror so quickly, because when these 2 turns of terror expires, he can immediately use his Vortex Plus to re-inflict terror again. So personally, I feel it's better to hold off on Eald'narche's AA until at least the second cycle of terror that you want to inflict. With Eald'narche, you really have to have the mindset that he is nothing but a terror inflictor, and all his turns should be is to focus on recharging his EX meter in time, so that you can re-inflict terror when it's about to expire on the boss. So now I've already inflicted terror and his EX is charged. I actually don't want to spam a lot of his skills and save them for later, because you do need to use his skills to quickly charge his EX meter. However, at this stage, since he has changed forms, personally I always like to use one of his Omega Javelin, and this will inflict warp on the boss and essentially all the enemies, which will give Eald'narche free follow-up turns after every enemy turn, and that itself is a huge boost to DPS in the fight. The moment that you inflict terror on the enemies, you want to keep a very close eye on how many turn counts remain on terror. So now that I've inflicted warp and I have Eald'narche's EX charge, there's really not much point in using any of his skills, and this is where you want to be spamming his HP attack plus. You can see it actually does very nice damage, especially when supported by very potent attack auras. So here the boss has been disabled, and because the boss has been inflicted with warp and sketch, so here I get free attacks. So it may look pretty boring that I'm spamming just HP++ with Eald'narche, but really it is a very integral part of his kit. And with only 12 skill users between his S1 and S2, you want to be very careful on how you use his skills. So here the boss still has one turn of terror, so I'm still not using his skills or his EX yet. Okay, so here's where terror has worn off completely, and before I use his EX, I'll be using his additional ability first. And then I'll be using his EX right after. The only thing unfortunate coming from this is the boss has changed targets and it is now not targeting Eald'narche, which means that the boss and the minions will act. And this is unfortunate, but it is a unique mechanic in this stage. In many Lufenia fights, when the boss is targeting all or targeting Eald'narche, most of the time they actually do not change targets halfway, and if you lock them down there, they will remain to be locked down as long as terror persists. So this is just one of those fights where the boss can actually change targets even if it is disabled. Okay, so I've used his EX and the boss is now charged with 4 turns of terror. Once you use his EX to inflict terror, your focus with Eald'narche is always to charge his EX in time before terror runs out. And you can use characters that can delay or turn manipulate to give him extra turns to charge his EX meter. Importantly, to help you charge his EX meter, you always want to inflict or ensure the boss is inflicted with warp. And for that reason, here I use Omega Javelin. Because his additional ability is still active, Omega Javelin will, or I should say the warp will actually last for 2 additional turns. So here he gets an extra turn from warp. And if you look at the boss, Terror is only 2 more turns away, and his EX meter is only halfway charged. And here I can use his Stellar Burst. Now do keep in mind that at this point I've used one of his additional ability, and he only has 1 more additional ability remaining. I still have not used his LD yet to this point. Something that you can consider is using his LD before you use his first additional ability, and that way you can inflict his LD debuff earlier. It wouldn't make a lot of difference in terms of Eald'narche's DPS, because if you bring the right party members to complement him, he will be doing close to maximum damage during each of his turns anyway. So here I'm actually saving his LD until the next time I want to use his additional ability. And since the boss still has 2 more turns of terror, I'm still holding off on using his LD or abilities until I want to re-inflict terror again. Okay, at this point the boss did resummon the ads. So one consideration here is that you do want to consider inflicting the newly summoned minions with warp, so that Eald'narche will continue to get free turns after the minions get their turn. Or you may also want to consider using his LD so that you can use his additional ability followed by his EX to inflict terror. I don't really mind the minions that much, so because of that I'll just use his Omega Javelin to re-inflict warp on the minions. Alright, so it's back to a fully charged EX meter with Eald'narche, and the boss still has 1 more turn of terror. So here I'm just holding off on using his EX until I need to reapply terror on the boss. Okay, when you're planning ahead, always look at the turn bar when you're playing with Eald'narche, and when you're planning ahead, don't forget that Eald'narche always gets a free turn after enemy turns, so you do need to factor that in as well. So here I still have quite a lot of room before boss B gets a turn again, so I'm still just using regular attacks with Eald'narche. So I don't need to re-inflict terror because the boss still has 1 more turn of terror. So it's really just spamming HP plus attack over and over again. Alright, and this is where I will use Eald'narche's LD, because I actually want to get 1 free additional ability before his EX. I think I can actually hold off for 1 more turn, but you know, better safe than sorry, and I'm already cutting it pretty close here. So Eald'narche's LD is incoming. Right, so here I get 1 free skill use of Eald'narche, which I use on his additional ability. Alright, so boss is about to get a turn, Eald'narche has his AA up, and here I'm re-inflicting terror with his Vortex Plus. So here you can see I've kept the boss really locked down with terror. And the idea from here on in is just continuing what I've already done. So I'll be, you know, in essence, continuing on recharging his EX meter with his skill users again, and importantly, preparing for the next EX plus to use at the opportune moment. I will be ending the video soon, otherwise it's going to be a very long video. As final notes, obviously you will realize that Eald'narche will not have indefinite uses of his additional ability. He does have up to 5 users, so 3 free skill users from his LD and 2 AA charges, which in most cases will last for the entire fight. However, if you really find that you need more users of his additional ability, you can consider free skill users from Onion Knight, and this is why I actually have Onion Knight set as a call unit on Ares. So it actually can give Eald'narche 1 more use of his additional ability Besides that, you also have to factor in your summon as well. Obviously, if you are going to summon, you don't actually need to inflict 4 turns of terror, because Eald'narche will be able to get additional turns inside summon, which will allow him to charge up his EX meter. So the terror before you use summon does not need to be 4 turns. You can only use a 2 turns terror, pop summon, and charge his EX meter back in time to re-inflict terror again. So that's also another way to save on additional ability use. So that's it for this video. I hope that it gives you an idea on how to cycle through Eald'narche's EX. It is not a very straightforward strategy. It's not just use his EX every time it's up. It's a lot of advanced planning required. You do need to keep an eye on how many turns terror is remaining on the boss, especially since the debuff icon is the same. And you do need to look very closely at the turn bar and plan in advance when do you actually want to use his EX again. In between those times, you want to use his skill users to charge his EX meter, and when his EX meter is fully charged, if you do not want to use it yet, you should be using HP++ attack instead of his skills, so that you can save his skills to charge the next cycle of EX. So that's it for this video. I will be including a timestamp in the video description, and as always, if you enjoyed the video, do leave a like, comment, or subscribe. It really helps a lot. Till then, I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.